This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 402 of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. And for this week's episode, we're back at Bierstadt Lager House, live and in person. But joining me for this panel discussion on brewing West Coast IPA are Brian Hutchinson. Welcome back to the podcast, Hutch.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Hutch is from Cannonball Creek, of course. Anyone who watches GABF and World Beer Cup results is very familiar with Cannonball Creek. We can talk about that in a second. Also joining me, Phil Joyce of Amalgam. Welcome back to the podcast, Phil.
Happy to be here.
And then, of course, joining us is Jake Gardner from Westbound and Down. Welcome back to the podcast, Jake.
Thanks for having me. Always glad to be drinking some lager here at Bierstadt.
And a little bit of IPA on the side. I think this is your third time on the podcast, Jake.
Happy to be back.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about brewing award-winning West Coast IPA, but with a Colorado perspective here. Of course, Westbound and Down over the years, 9 GABF medals, gold for Westbound Select in 2023, silver for Spirit of the West in 2022 and 2023, World Beer Cup silver also for the same beer in 2023, gold in the Colorado Brewers Cup this past year. Also a silver back in 2019 for Westbound double IPA. Cannonball Creek, 19 GABF medals. Most recently, gold for More Than a Zealand, New Zealand style IPA. A featherweight pale ale, 5 GABF medals and a World Beer Cup medal. Trump Hands Session IPA, 3 World Beer Cup medals, 2 of them gold, 2 GABF medals, golds. Anyway, all of this is just to say that
it's really to say that I'm just riding on their coattails.
You know, Phil, you haven't been making IPA at Amalgam for that long, but for that to come out and start winning medals very quickly on several batches in, I mean, it says something, right?
I mean, he was part of that 2019 double IPA with us.
Yeah,
it's true.
Anyway, we've talked about, we've had lots of conversations with California brewers about West Coast IPA. We talk about West Coast IPA a lot here, and I thought since we've got such a phenomenal brain trust, and I could also justify putting this conversation together so we could come here and all drink beer together on a Friday afternoon, like why not do this and get these perspectives going as well. So we are going to talk about West Coast IPA through the course of this. Also, and I say West Coast IPA, but that probably includes New Zealand IPA because that's obviously something Hutch does incredibly well. Something that Jake called me a few weeks ago and was asking me some questions about. So we've had some of these ongoing conversations, and hey, I just thought it'd be fun to share it out there with the world of the podcast audience. Before we do that, for years, G&D Chillers has chilled the beers you love, partnering with 3,000 plus breweries across the country. They're proud of the cool partnerships they've built, offering 24/7 service and support. They build with non-proprietary parts, expert craftsmanship, and constant innovation. Their in-house engineering crew has been piping breweries, wineries, and distilleries for more than 30 years. They offer free piping design and consultation with the sale of every chiller they build. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com or call them to discuss your next project. You didn't think I was going to mention you giving me a call about New Zealand IPA, did you, Jake?
I did not.
I'd like to know about this.
Anyway, we'll get into that in a second. It's also time to stop worrying.
We'll be back.
It's also time to stop worrying about diacetyl with Berkeley Yeast's line of fresh strains. These revolutionary yeast strains are engineered to produce the ALDC enzyme inside the cell, preventing diacetyl before it forms. That means no more lengthy diacetyl rests, just clean, crisp beer that's ready for packaging sooner. Whether you bring a classic lager with fresh Ondex or a hazy IPA with fresh London, you'll get ultra-low diacetyl levels and let your beer's true flavors shine. The team at Fireforge Craft Beer call it a cheat code and a game changer for their hoppy beers. Learn more at berkeleyyeast.com/fresh. And I imagine that diacetyl and ALDC are going to be something we talk about significantly here later on the podcast. Also, a day in the life of a brewer is packed enough as it is, so why not let Old Orchard assist with your R&D? Custom blend development is available through their innovative R&D lab. Their bulk division supplies a wide range of beverage segments, making it the one-stop shop for flavoring beer and beyond. For more information and free samples, they're waiting at oldorchard.com/brewer. That's oldorchard.com/brewer. Phil, I want to start off with you. Because the Amalgam IPA program, it's not exactly new, but it is as a developed thing and a kind of element of Amalgam that you do. Let's talk about the way you got into making IPA. Obviously, Amalgam got started as mixed culture beer, sour beer, barrel aged beer, barley wine, stout, etc. And this is a significant pivot. Talk to me about how you thought about moving into this area, what drove you to do it, and then how you started to formulate an idea for what an Amalgam IPA program would look like.
I've brewed IPA for a lot of my career. I've always really enjoyed that. I think there's this certain level of creativity that comes from hops and other ingredients and processes that you can't really find in any other style of brewing, which really piques my interest and curiosities. And I think IPA, like a lot of styles of beer, just lend itself to having this kind of conversation and drinking them. And that's really fun for me. And while I do still enjoy the, big barrel-aged beers and funky mixed culture stuff, it's less likely that I'm going to sit down and bring a 4-pack and talk with the four of you and chat about how that happened. It's like, this is a fun moment in time, and I had 4 ounces of it, and I was impressed, and I moved on. And IPA is something that if I really like it, like I'm going to sit down and drink a whole 4-pack myself, maybe sometimes to my own detriment. But I think that it just encourages a conversation, and I really, really enjoy that about it.
So as you were thinking about, what an Amalgam IPA might be, where did you go seek out that kind of inspiration, and how did you, basically decide, what Amalgam was going to be known for in this kind of IPA realm? Because you definitely have staked out a clear territory, and I do mean clear territory for Amalgam IPA. How did you start thinking about what your recipes were going to be and what those beers you were going to lead with?
I don't know. I used to make, IPA at Westbound and Down with Jake. I talked to Hutch regularly about these kinds of things. I really enjoy their beers. I think that they stand out in our local market as two of the, best producers in the state. And so I'd just start from there, drink their beers, see what I like about them, see if there's anything I want to do differently. I think more often than not, there's not much that I want to do differently. It's just, I have friends with a few brewers in California, and we send beers back and forth and get to drink their beers too, and have a lot to learn from all kinds of different friends in the industry.
Sure. Well, maybe we'll then kick off with a more broad question. Looking at West Coast IPA today and the iterations that you all brew of it, because you also now are brewing a pretty significant range within this broader family that, if I go to Cannonball, if I go to Westbound, obviously there's no Amalgam tap room to go to, but, in that kind of sense, there's you're brewing New Zealand iterations, you're brewing, specific single hop, variations, you're brewing, some, with different kind of fermentation approaches. What's that range look like now? Maybe Hutch, you can, kick off now. What is driving you from that creative side, and where are you finding ways, to build breadth within this West Coast IPA program?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately for me, it's constantly an exciting world to explore, and I feel like there's almost not enough time to do everything that I want to do. So I'm really lucky that I feel that way. But yeah, I think for us, obviously we're going to talk about those adjacent styles like pale ale and session IPA that are important to us as a brewery. So you've got that breadth already built in with just lower alcohol versions of these highly drinkable, highly hopped beers. And then within, traditional or modern West Coast IPA itself, I mean, with the advancement that's come out in hop products, my personal ability to help select the hops that I'm using, all those have upped the game and changed the parameters and allowed for a lot of variety within the style, to be honest. Yeah.
Sure. Jake, what's driving your, the kind of creative process these days, or Westbound's creative process? Because it's you, but it's also a team of brewers that you're working with.
Before I brewed beer professionally, I was an obsessed home brewer at CU, and Hop Vivant, brewed by Hutch when he was at Mountain Sun, was a beer that really kind of changed not to be dramatic, but kind of changed my life in the way that it was like, I am very passionate about this beer style. Inspired a lot of travel to San Diego and exploring West Coast IPA before it was even a thing. Or the nomenclature was not calling it West Coast IPA.
As it was a nascent developing style.
Correct. And I was fortunate enough early in my career to be running Hogshead Brewery here in town with the original owner, Steve Kirby, who, hell of a guy, had a very big passion for not West Coast IPA, but would also leave town for 4 to 6 months at a time to come back to find out I had brewed quite a bit of what we would now consider West Coast IPA. So I had kind of unlimited reins. And I remember at the time not having even the language to describe the beers, but we're making beers with very little other malt other than Pilsner malt or two-row. So that was kind of like my foray into it, was some beers that Hutch had made previously, and then early iterations at Cannonball. And then Phil and I started making a beer together in 2017, and I think that's really when Westbound really began to elevate our IPA game. And we were reading, and I think worth referencing that Scott Janis
New IPA book.
Yeah, New IPA. And I remember Phil and I both bought a copy. We were talking about it like every day at work. And I feel like IPA happens in waves like that, where there's these monumental kind of theoretical moments that push very far in a single direction. Like I remember at that time, all three of us were collaborating on beers, making beers together, traveling, making beers with other people. It was a lot of Whirlpool only or first wort or 90-minute and Whirlpool only hops. And we've moved back more to the middle of maybe where that came from. But a lot of those ideas became very influential in where I think modern IPA is come. So I think that played a large role. I've been fortunate enough to learn a lot just being in the same town as Hutch my entire career, and B, have had, incredible brewers on my team the whole time. I've been very honest about the fact that I don't think I'm necessarily the best idea guy. I've had guys on my teams that can smell hops and come up with unbelievable combinations of new hop products, our new selected lots, and I'm very fortunate to learn from those people and the same people that are at this table today. I mean, we select hops with Hutch. I think I'm way better at making beers that are already great better than I am at coming up with the ideas. I've gotten lucky a couple times, but I think that's kind of the approach at Westbound. Obviously, we got Alex Bakken and Derek Goodman now, both incredible brewers. So, trying to draw on inspirations they have, trying to keep really clean profiles at the forefront. And I think Westbound, we've gotten a little away from it recently, but try to focus on very clean flavors that are easy to understand and identify kind of linguistically is something that I'm passionate about. Just like, can you taste it, feel it, describe it? And if that can happen, I think that adds to that kind of clean throughput that West Coast IPA can deliver that I think is unique to the style.
Connecting West Coast IPA flavors to language in a direct way and letting language drive your creative process. That's amazing, Jake, for someone who is a longtime magazine editor, writer, and whatnot. I definitely want to talk a little bit more about that because it's just throwing the catnip in front of me just like that. But let's talk about that, and let's also talk about how that starts to translate into actual beer recipes. Before we do that, Oregon-based Indie Hops is expanding possibilities for brewers in 2025. Strata, Indie's original hop release, is now available in cold side flowable hop oil form. That's Strata Hyper Boost in coordination with Yakima Chief Hops. Indie Hops T90 pellets establish the multi-layered Strata experience, while cryogenic CGX pellets in coordination with Crosby Hops, now Strata Hyper Boost with YCH, expand the possibilities. Learn more about Strata and Indie's more recent hop releases at www.indiehops.com. Indie Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. And upgrade your fermentation game with Unitank 2.0 from SS Brewtech, featuring a laser-welded cooling jacket for efficient and precise temperature control, an innovative silicone racking arm, and a carbonation stone that allows you to carbonate right in the fermenter. Unitank 2.0 is engineered to help you get the most out of your fermentations. Available from 7 gallons up to 1 barrel sizes, Unitank 2.0 will be right at home in your homebrew setup, producing pilot batches at your commercial brewery. Visit ssbrewtech.com to learn more. So, Phil, let's go back to you and let's talk about some of your recent award-winning IPAs. Process-wise, how do you start building a foundation for recipe for West Coast IPA, and and then what does that process then look like? In terms of malt, are you bringing in two-row here? You going now with the Pilsner malt base? How do you start building a recipe?
So,
and it's all going to be base malt, I imagine, because light is the name of the game.
What if I
for all
told you it
malt.
wasn't? It is. It's all base malt. No, just to clarify for those that don't know, I work full time here at Bierstadt Lager House, and I have a single 20-barrel tank. And Ashley and Bill are kind enough to let me make beer occasionally, and when it fits in the schedule, and I put it in that tank. And so I'd say that Jake mentioned the new IPA book, and I still go back to that. There's lots of things to be learned in terms of hop flavor and aroma and impact when it came from sort of this earlier introduction to like these hazy style and New England IPAs. And I think more recently for me, I take more inspiration in my IPA sort of design and thought from lager beer. And only because I'm around it every day. And I mentioned this earlier, but IPA is exciting to me because if it's well made, I want to sit down and have 2 or 3 pints. And lager is the epitome of that for me. It's like it is the beer that I can drink one beer of all day long. And so if I can take any elements of that drinkability and put them into IPA, that's a goal for me. So how that looks here at Bierstadt is almost 100% Pilsner malt. I like to use multiple different Pilsner malts depending on what my goals are. We use a lot of
multiple different Pilsner. So one Pilsner malt, but different ones depending on what those goals are.
Yeah. So, we use exclusively Environment products almost here at Bierstadt. So I'm very familiar with them. I love their Pilsner malt. We use a lot of Barca Pilsner malt here. I like their extra pale premium Pilsner malt. And so a lot of times, just because I'm familiar with it and how it works in the brew house here, and because we have things like a 4-roller mill that is really tuned into that kernel size, that's oftentimes what Environment malt oftentimes makes up a base malt for me. I use a lot of Gambrinus Pilsner malt. I think it's really lean. I like that to dry beers out, help with attenuation, and kind of just build a blank foundation for more hops. I've dabbled around in a few, but I'd say that like between Gambrinus Pilsner malt and the sort of range of Environment Pilsner malts are sort of my sweet spot. It's generally somewhere between like 75 and 25% of one or the other, and just just kind of depends
So
on
still
what I want.
blending the two, blending a couple of different Pilsner malts.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I think that's just to sort of differentiate what I do a little bit from the things that are done here at Bierstadt. But process wise, at least in the brew house, I very much have gone to the camp of Ashley Carter learned to brew lager good, and so I treat these beers a lot like that. And so she's always a believer, if the process works, leave it the same. And if you want to add an ingredient, change one variable at a time. And so for me, things like decoction, I've decocted every IPA we've ever made.
Really?
It's available here on the brew house. I like the way it works. I really like the way that it changes the flavor and richness of the malt. And I'm very comfortable with it because I'm familiar with what it does in our Bierstadt beers, but that might be a little bit more characterful than I want in some of my IPAs. So I might lean heavy in a beer like that in a Gambrinus Pilsner or something that's very, very lean, or even, within the Environment portfolio, their extra pale premium Pilsner, which is a little bit leaner, knowing that I'm going to get a little bit more characterful.
You'll subtract back out with some of that malt choice, knowing that your process is going to add some of that character back in.
Yeah. So it sort of starts there. I think.
I didn't think decocted IPA was the way we were going to start off this conversation, but that's brilliant.
I kind of lost track of your original question, but I think process wise.
So did I.
I think of West Coast IPA first and foremost as well attenuated and bitter. I think those are and bright, obviously. But those things are very, very important stylistically. So bitterness is a big thing for me. Where that comes from, I think scientifically there's a lot of really, really great and smarter people out there than me, and I have a lot of really great resources. Your own magazine and podcast, the Master Brewers Association, the ASBC. There's a lot of information out there if you just want to read about it. And I kind of take approach of sort of a scientific mind. So I'll start with the science and then say what works for me and what really fits my palate.
Let's hold the bitterness conversation for later. I think that is obviously they work in tension with each other because you're talking about light malt, and so what you consider bitterness and what becomes prominent might not be what it used to have to be when these beers were bigger, sweeter, maltier. But I want to kind of get a sense for building foundations for some of these West Coast IPAs today. Hutch,
is foundation just malt?
Yeah, let's just talk about malt
cool.
foundation now. Phil, I love leaving hop conversations to the end just to make sure people listen through this whole thing. We don't give them the thing that they think they want early. You gotta make people work for it.
Well, just as a heads up, my wife specifically, but a lot of friends of mine tease me for telling Phil stories. They say I'm going to be a great grandpa because I can just ramble and talk forever. So if it gets to that point, just cut me off and say, save that for later. We'll talk about it later.
We're going to have to do a special excerpt edition of this podcast with Phil's grandpa ramblings.
I mean, Grandpa Phil has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's very nice.
It does.
I'm excited for that phase.
And you have such...
Got to be done with the kid phase, that's for sure.
You've got You have a great voice for this too, Phil. Like I can just listen to you talk. It's so comforting. It's so it just feels so warm and nice.
Says Jamie.
So Hutch, what talk about some of the foundations that you build now, and what that kind of range looks like in Cannonball Creek, in terms of malt foundation for these recipes.
Sure.
And then what I'm really interested in is what's like, as Phil mentioned, what are some of the kind of ultimate design goals of some of these beers that cause you to make some of the creative decisions to change these things?
Sure. I mean, with the obvious caveat that the three of us talk a lot outside of this room, so you are going to find some similarities in the way that we all produce IPA, because I have learned a ton from both these guys sitting here as well, and I think it's, I think we would all agree we learn from each other quite a bit. That being said, I think malt choice is extremely important in making IPA. So the irony of saving the hop thing till the end, I think honestly, this is the part that maybe you want to listen to the most. I've been on a base malt kind of exploration for the last, 10 or 15 years making IPA, and I still don't know that I've nailed it. I have like 2 or 3 different grain bills that I play with, but it always starts with a clean Pilsner malt as the base. Our preference right now that we're using for most of our beers is Pure Idaho from Great Western. To me, it's very similar to Gambrinus, which is a malt that I've used a lot in the past and still continue to use, in the sense that it's just very light in color and very, very clean. And that's really what we're looking for. So that's a base malt that you're going to find frequently in the majority of our hoppy beer right now. I'm also a big fan of combining Pilsner malts for certain beers. I think that the Weyermann Premium Pils is a fantastic malt. If left on its own, it adds a little bit more body and kind of crackery malt flavor than I prefer. And that's where like cutting it with a malt like Gambrinus or Pure Idaho really works out well. And the big thing too is those malts really drive attenuation. And I think you could probably include the rare premium Pils in that conversation as well, as far as beers that are just going to finish a half a point Plato or more less than they would if you were just to use like a 2-row or a Weyermann base malt. And I think that's incredibly important to the drinkability of the beer, right? Like we're shooting for a terminal gravity on these beers under 2, 1.5 to 2, I think being ideal. Sometimes even lower than that after hop creep, and it still works. I think that More Than a Zealand that won the gold medal after hop creep was about a 1.2 or 1.3 terminal gravity.
Damn.
So dryness is a thing.
Sure,
you know what I mean? And it's something that we're chasing. But obviously balancing everything else when you're you can't just isolate that variable, right?
Right.
You can't make a 1.3 beer with, 5 pounds of bittering hops and 7 barrels. It's not going to be good, So as far as base malt is concerned, I'm very much on the lean and clean Pilsner side of things. We used to use 2-row, and I don't like it nearly as much as the malts that we're using right now. And I think there's a couple different ways to skin that cat. But again, Pure Idaho, Gambrinus, the raw premium Pils, those are all good ways to get to that end game of a low terminal gravity with a clean malt profile that sets the foundation for the beer.
Are you blending them like Phil is?
Sometimes, yeah. Like one of my go-to grain bills is just it's the Gambrinus with the premium Pils from Weyermann. I love that combination. Yeah.
Cool.
And sometimes I'm not. Pure Idaho beer, 100%, works pretty well too.
Yeah.
I do tend to include a little bit of wheat in most of my beers, not all of them.
Okay.
And these days, that's looking more like flaked wheat than malted wheat. And that just seems to add a nuance of body, which I know I've talked the whole time about avoiding body,
right.
But adding a little bit back.
Wheat is that way of adding the idea of body back without it being heavy in the way that
exactly right.
Mouthfeel more than really.
Yeah, mouthfeel I think is a better word actually. You're right, Jake. And then head retention's never a bad thing either, and it helps with that a little bit. But I'm some of these beers are 100% Pilsner malt, and some of them have some flaked wheat.
How much flaked wheat if you're going to add it in?
5% or less.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, that's about where I'm at. So for me, in 7 barrels, that ends up being about a half a bag or whatever.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Mm-hmm. Jake, how about you guys? What's malt looking like for you all these days?
I'd say to not just repeat what's been said, which I largely agree with. We have some higher wheat percentages than 5%. Like to mix in specifically white wheat from RAR. Has a low molecular, the protein in it has a low molecular weight. And when we mix that with flaked wheat, I think that combination gives us our best head retention, especially as we approach beers that have these very high hopping, dry hop compounds where you're looking at kind of foam collapse from high hopping rates. We found to be a successful combination. We're big fans at Westbound of don't solve problems you don't have. So build beers, drink them, bring them to QC, taste them, and then solve problems you actually have. And that would be an example of one we have found we have, right? And a hop hop selection lots change, but generally, as you're approaching the hopping rates, I think all three of us enjoying these styles of beer, you're going to be in that realm of like foam stability. Hops go from helping foam stability to actually hurting it at the rates we like to dry hop beers with. Hop products, which we'll discuss, can also be an aid in reducing foam collapse. So we think about that. Weirmann Pilsner malt, which I think is an excellent product, actually has kind of been not my favorite. We did just hang a Weirmann nice sign they sent us, so I apologize in advance if they're listening. I hung it today, so take it with a grain of salt. But I'm finding some character in it that I don't love as much. We're huge fans. We're raw people. Have been for a handful of years. We're have bounced between their Alix Pils, their Canadian grown facility, and the Preem Pils out of Shakopee as our silo malt. We often, though, do have second Pilsner malts, especially in our one-offs. Westbound IPA, though, is the Alix Pils. Pure Idaho, though, has been won us a handful of awards. So also big fans of that malt. But we do love the blend. I think, a lot of it's brew house specific. I think water is often underestimated in all this equation. So I don't think what I'm saying is right and what they're saying is wrong. I think what works in their brew houses with their water profiles play a much larger factor. Like Hutch makes beer with Gambrinus malt that I couldn't imagine making at either of our two facilities. Like ours would finish at like 0.7 Plato if we did what I've seen him do. And not saying his don't finish crazy dry, they do. But I mean, we put like three bags of Gambrinus in with any raw product and finish at like 1.3 no matter what. And I think that has a lot to do with calcium and the way we treat our yeast. And there's a lot of multitude of factors. It's hard to describe how they're going to play out. So, as I've always said, a lot of the best beer making is about making beer, drinking beer, reacting, making intelligent decisions on, what you liked, what you didn't like, and tuning the knobs of moving in the right direction. So I think you make great beer with any of those beers, any of those malts. I think for us, Weirmann can tend to have a sweetness and a near oxidative quality that we can't get around, but that I have not experienced in either of those beers. And from these two, and I've thought they've been incredible, but Weirmann Pilsner products have not been our best forefront, but that
But you're also not decocting them.
Bingo. I wasn't going to go there, but I'm glad he did. But he's not. Hutch isn't either.
Well, right, but you're solving problems in different ways, right?
And
so if you're trying to optimize, going through a decoction and step mash, can optimize in certain ways. Adding wheat into that can optimize for the same kinds of things, just a different solution to the same problem. It's
ultimately, I think all three of us are getting to like a very dry and in varying ways beer, and then solving some kind of protein, lack of protein or head retention issues with wheat in different ways that are pretty similar. And I think if you drink these beers blind, maybe somebody's palate's way better than mine, but I would be shocked if someone was like, oh, I can tell Phil's got Barca Pils in it. I mean, I've drank all of Phil's beers that have been released in multitude and couldn't tell you which ones had which base malts in them. Maybe that makes me a dumbass, but I think it more speaks to the fact that the processes around using those malts play a larger role than the malt selection themselves. If I had one take, it would be that, focusing on dry malt that has this light water cracker kind of character that gets out of the way generally is the takeaway here. And then how you get to that conclusion that works with the water profile you're either given or can create if you're fortunate enough to have RO water probably plays equally as big a part as the malt selection itself.
I think your larger point about it being brew house dependent is really important. I think that's a lot of what good brewing is anyway, is working with what you have, right? And figuring it out on your system and realizing that there's going to be massive difference. I mean, look at Phil's brew house compared to mine. It's ridiculous. I have one pump on my brew house. He's got a German control panel that looks like a Star Wars movie scene, and so we're dealing with very, very different tools. And I think that's important to recognize when we're discussing formulating these beers. And so I think to Jake's point, just kind of going back to the old saying of, starting with what it's going to taste like in the glass and then reverse engineering that with your own equipment is kind of what we're all doing here, albeit slightly differently.
Phil, what's that decoction process look like? I mean, obviously, we say decoction, but all decoctions are not the same. They're shorter, they're longer decoctions, than how that works in with your step mash process along the way, trying to optimize for certain things. What is that general, step and decoction process? I'm only asking because it's fascinating to me that you're making West Coast IPA with decoction. And I have to ask on behalf of Joe Stang, who, is our in-house decoction fanatic.
Sure.
Would be upset if I didn't ask you more details on these.
Admittedly, I don't have a brew sheet in front of me, but we've done a lot of work here at Bierstadt over the last 18 months, specifically in ways we can alter our mash regime to eliminate late stage chill haze, and it's worked so well within our Bierstadt beers that I've just kind of absorbed that. So the way I mash IPA is actually identical to the way that we mash slow pour pills, which is a 55C mash in, kind of a protein rest. And then a ramp to 64. We've added a 67 degree C rest, which is that sort of 20 minutes at each, but it's a 67 a little bit warmer that seems to have helped eliminate some of our late stage chill haze and helped with some clarification things. And then the final rest is the mash off decoction. So you're basically at that high beta alpha amylase rest. For those in Fahrenheit, that's like a 157 at the last step, and then 2/3 of the malt gets pumped up to the lauter ton, and then the 1/3 remaining gets boiled off. I think especially in IPA, I can't really say one way or the other, but from the little research that I've been able to do, the big benefit in that is, even though I can use a wide breadth of malt, there's something that happens in the decoction process that helps to increase the uptake of fan by yeast through fermentation, which I think helps the longevity of the beers.
Sure.
And I think for me, we don't use any wheat, we don't use any adjunct, but I think it does change the malt character, and it does create a textural element to the beer, and some foam, enhances some foam positive things that wouldn't be there without it. So.
Yeah. Impacting fan levels. We can also talk more about that, because that does seem to be something that a lot of West Coast IPA brewers are focusing on. I do want to talk about fermentation, and maybe we can use that as a segue to talk about it. Before we do that, did you know that Isuzu trucks have been the best selling low cab forward trucks in America every year since 1986? That's right. For over 38 years, the legendary durability, remarkable performance, and low cost of ownership of Isuzu trucks have made them a favorite for work truck owners. You may have seen their ultimate craft beer truck that debuted at the Craft Brewers Conference in 2019, and it's been there every year since. As members of the Brewers Association, they've partnered with breweries, suppliers, and distributors alike to support the craft beer industry. Whether you're looking for a self-distribution solution or one to deliver supplies, there's an Isuzu truck that'll fit your needs. Go to IsuzuCV.com to check out their impressive lineup, or visit an Isuzu dealer today to find out why now, more than ever, Isuzu trucks are the trucks you trust for the work you do. Also, protecting your beer's highest quality is crucial to maintain its unique taste and prevent spoilage organisms, and microbiological testing plays a vital role in this process. Sativa offers a comprehensive portfolio of laboratory filtration products designed for both lab and production floor use. Their products are portable, affordable, and suitable for any size craft brewing operation, and they support a wide range of applications, including microbiology analysis to detect spoilage organisms during manufacturing through the final product release and shelf life studies, general filtration for degassing and yeast removal, and analytical chemical analysis of raw materials and final products. Discover how Sativa can help you Protect the quality of your beer today. Visit beerandbrewing.com/Cytiva to learn more. That's CYTIVA. And tickets for the Craft Beer and Brewing 2025 Brewers Retreat in Asheville and Mills River, North Carolina are on sale now, and only a handful remain. I think it's like 3 or 4 as we are recording this. Brew on homebrew systems with some of the most inspiring craft brewers in the United States, like Vinny and Natalie Chilurzo of Russian River, Evan Price of Green Cheek, Mark Josephson of Scratch, Bob Coons of Highland Park, Chris Johnson of Green Bench, Neil Fisher of Weldworks, hosts Ken and Brian Grossman of Sierra Nevada, and more. Learn more and secure your tickets at brewersretreat.com. This might be your last chance this week to get those tickets if you're interested in attending. All right, let's talk a little bit. So we've talked about the kind of mash process. Let's get into fermentation. And I should also note that Chris Black showed up and is now like operating a scissor lift out there that's beeping like a motherfucker. And I'm just going to blame Chris Black of Falling Rock for this because
it's his fault.
It is his fault. It is his fault. I'm sure he's doing something productive out there, but damn it, Chris. Damn it, Chris. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about fermentation. More. All right. Every time I'm just gonna start cursing Chris Black, much like all the young brewers that could never get on his tap list. Oh, sorry, that was mean. Let's talk about fermentation. Jake, why don't you kick off our fermentation conversation here? Obviously lager yeast is taking a bigger and bigger role in IPA fermentation, but there's also ways of using ale yeast and very clean types of fermentation. Where do you guys find yourselves these days?
We use both. To steal Phil's word, we use both those levers, but more in the Chico camp. I'd say I think. How
do you make those decisions as to what to ferment with and what that process is going to be like?
I think a couple different ways. I think one is, two things. For competition, we honestly have begun to look at, you'll see these competitions and they'll tell you when they're announcing the awards, and we roughly know, and I'm not a judge at those national competitions like Phil is, but we know that a lot, not all, but some of those final tables are a week of. So we're calculating kind of in that packaging competition when the beers are due, when our schedule dictates we need to make those beers, and we'd have to package them regardless of when they're due, and then when final table is, because if you're not planning to win it, you're not planning on winning. And I think...
and you guys are working on that right now because we're in World Beer Cup season, aren't we?
Yes, which is why I speak to this fluidly, because it is the
top of mind.
It is the language we speak currently. But I think so. If there were no competitions, we would still use 3470 specifically for certain applications where I think it, especially with yeast that are more where the sulfur-derived compounds are more of their forte. I think so. Simcoe heavy beers can be a great example, and that doesn't mean Simcoe is our favorite hop on both yeast selections. It's the hop we use the most of, regardless. But I think when you think of hops specifically, like Citra, right, is just a great hop. Period. Use it everywhere. Everyone does use it everywhere. It's no coincidence. It has the most acreage. But like Mosaic and Simcoe have this, and Simcoe specifically had this high amount of sulfur compound aromatics that I think can be better expressed through kind of bound thiol opportunities with 3470, but also just with the clean nature that lager yeast presents. So
bound thiol opportunities with 3470. What does that mean, Jake?
So, we have, I'm not going to try to be on this podcast to be the thiol expert. You can just read Scott Janis's shit on that. But I will say that, like Citra is kind of so liked generally for its high amount of unbound or free thiol potential, whereas other hops have a lot of thiol compounds that need either a mechanical action from heat, that then need a thiolized yeast, which is now a term people like, but 3470 has a partial allele and has more ability to use thiols than Chico. Regardless, I think we think about 3470 as like, are we trying to push these highly tropical thiol compounds, or are we trying to lean more into like what we sometimes describe as like pellet character? Like, do we want what we smell in the bag in the beer? If so, generally, I think that's a Chico decision. If you have hops that are kind of like more OG heavy generally, or have more of these sulfur compounds, then I think unlocking those through things like 3470 selection can be a better choice. A lot of experimentation, a lot of hop combinations, but that's how we think of it. And then if it's packaging competition, then 3470 and its own ability to create sulfur, I think creates an incredible opportunity for longevity and hop character, as well as, I have been pretty vocal on some of your podcasts and video stuff on that. I think thiolized yeast can come off as incredibly one-dimensional. That being said, those flavors have unbelievable longevity. I mean, it's like you can age them and get all the other oxidized characters, and that thiolized character that you're associating with a big tropical fruit just stays the whole time. And again, in a packaging competition, or just, maybe the packaging competition is you're making beer that's going to be warm stored and sold around the country. That's still a packaging competition.
Good point.
And people can tie into that anchor flavor. Big opportunity there. So we think about all those things. That was a long rambling answer because I had a lot of ideas, but generally still Team Chico, because I think expressing the hop flavors that we select is ultimately like what I find more attractive. I think it's what our team is more excited about, but I think both have merit.
Hutch, how do you approach this?
First off, I think that all the comments that Jake made about packaging are incredibly relevant.
Sure.
That being said, much more simplistic on our side. D-Free Chico is the way to go for me in IPA. I generally really prefer a Chico profile in IPA. I love West Coast Pils. I like all kinds of hoppy lager. But for IPA myself, in general, I often find 3470 or similar lager yeast to be a little bit distracting with the sulfur compounds. I do understand how that can amplify hop aroma, but often for me, it's just personally not my favorite sensory thing when I'm smelling and drinking IPA. So I just like Chico for IPA in general. And then the D-Free thing, obviously, we're doing that to navigate hop creep, right? We talked a little bit about ALDC before we started recording this podcast. And
if you don't create that precursor through the fermentation process, then you just don't.
I've just simply had better luck avoiding diacetyl that is a result of hop creep by using D-Free yeast than I have by using ALDC. And that's our experience in the brewery. It's been pretty much 100% successful, whereas I would say our experience with ALDC has probably been 70% successsul.
Well, let's be honest. I mean, ALDC is also expensive, and it's going to add additional complexity in the process. I mean, I know we had a conversation earlier last year where they talked about how just zinc promoting fermentation health allow them to decrease the amount ALDC use, and that's a pretty phenomenal thing too. Not that. Yeah. Anyway, there are a lot of different, levers that we can pull to.
You can skin this cat many ways, right? What we're doing currently at Cannonball.
Big fans of zinc.
Yeah. And you know what? That's something that we've been looking at and have not really spent a lot of time, or we haven't gotten into it yet. But I've heard great things, and I'm very curious. I'm zinc curious, if you will. Yeah.
On your podcast, Julian at Beechwood.
Garrison from Russian River.
Yeah, it was very influential, specifically then researching Julian, who I think in a multitude of channels, including yours, has provided information on his zinc trials, and we have applied those and kind of combined some of his information with Ben from Breakside, who is always an influence on us, who has a slightly different approach, has played a large role in both increasing our ability to crash beer sooner, which is, I think, played a role in beer longevity, but also, I think it's underplayed how much getting to the finished product faster. I feel like that is sometimes demonized as some way to like move beer quicker. Like, if the goal is providing the rawest hop expression possible, which I think broadly is Westbound's goal.
Good point you're getting to. Yeah.
Like, the quicker you can crash the beer and retain the more of that, the better.
Yeah.
Like, people
fresher beer, right? It's that simple. Yeah.
It is that simple. And especially when we're talking about these volatilized compounds, I mean, the quicker you can cap and crash the tank, the better. I mean, within reason. But, for us, like, people that I know that are taking 15 days to get to that point versus 10 or 12. I mean, I think that is a detriment to hop expression, which ultimately is like the topic of this podcast. Like, if you're talking about West Coast IPA, you're talking about maximizing hop expression. Ultimately, like, I would say that would be actually the only comment, right? Even when we discuss malt or yeast or anything else, we're talking about maximizing hop expression at the cost of everything else. I'd ask someone else to jump in if that's a dumbass statement. But I mean, I think that's what West Coast IPA means. Even with bitterness, like when you dial it back to moderate, all of it is just like, we've got Von Ebert volatile substance in front of us. Great beer. But just like even the name, it's like keys on the point, which is the most hop intensity you can bring. So
while creating drinkable beer, I would say.
Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm. But like that even aids to the point of just getting everything else out of the way. So we didn't like look up Julian. I mean, first I would say we didn't look up Julian talking about zinc because we wanted to talk about zinc. We wanted to talk about hop expression. But I'd even go as far as to guess that Julian didn't start studying zinc to talk about zinc. He started talking about it to talk about hop expression himself. So I think zinc is a yeast health, which zinc plays a role in. I think calcium is another part that people radically underplay in hops. Everyone's talk about wants to talk about sulfate to chloride ratios, and I think that's really important. But I think people that are missing the first step, which is optimizing calcium in the first place for yeast health. Step one, optimize calcium for yeast health.
Sure.
That is what's more like we have won medals with chloride heavy IPAs and with sulfate heavy IPAs. I don't think either is right or wrong. I think fucking up the IPAs are kicking in, excuse my French. But I think screwing up yeast health is at the forefront of the conversation.
I mean, these are basics, right? Is getting enough calcium in your beer?
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah.
But I think people are missing the conversation. And as you said, let's keep the hops to last because otherwise people would jump to conclusions. But the utmost importance of anything about making beer is yeast health. I mean, that is it. Like without that, you're just making sugar water. So
with the zinc conversation, which I find really interesting and mainly because I haven't dove into it too much and I'm very, very curious about it. But also, I think, we talk about, hop creep is always this thing, right? And we always talk about diacetyl. I'm of the firm opinion that diacetyl is not the only thing you need to worry about with hop creep, right? You're re-fermenting the beer. Acetaldehyde is absolutely a thing. And very few people ever bring that up. And in our brewery, we've experienced it multiple times. And so now we're getting back into general yeast health, right? And how you can navigate those waters. Go ahead.
I'm glad you say that because from a sensory perspective, I am much more hyper attuned to acetaldehyde than I am to diacetyl. Diacetyl doesn't bother me that much, which is why I can drink Czech lager.
Yep.
But acetaldehyde, I'm a hyper attuned to that, and I do get quite a bit of that.
West Coast Pills, anyone? Are you kidding me?
That's
it
what I was
shows
gonna
up there
say.
all the time.
34/7.
And we realized it right away. And we were like, oh, we're just terrible at making this style of beer. But what we're really dealing with is just another consequence of hop creep, right?
Yeah.
And having to navigate
particularly
that.
in a yeast too, that when you think about it, is going to be you always have to think about the components you're adding into the equation and what they're good at and what they're bad at, right? And so 3470, what it's great at is performing under cold and
Stress in general, right?
Yeah, stress in general. Yeah, I was going to say cold and stressful conditions. But so hop creep is kind of when you're in the foray of diacetyl is kind of the easy, like a good reason to pick 3470, right? It can clean it up at a lot of temperatures pretty well, and it produces not a ton of it compared to Chico. So your upfront production is lower, your uptake at a variety of temperatures is higher. Not saying you can't have diacetyl issues with the yeast, but a lot more covered in that category. Acetaldehyde, higher producer than Chico. Not as good at uptaking it, especially when its application is kind of hot lager, as Bierstadt homies like to call it, which I have no qualms with, but I would agree with. I mean, we are very aware we're hot lager guys. I personally think that's the better take on the style, but it comes at the high risk of acetaldehyde. I mean, that is the number one take. Like, you are driving the production and decreasing your opportunities to reduce it. So I do think anytime people are picking yeast, and especially when applying it outside of its style guidelines, which West Coast Pills, in the way we produce it, the way a lot of people produce it, which is at a warmer temperature primary fermentation, you need to be very aware of that yeast's potential. And we call it corn chip, because that's the way it comes off at that like sub-threshold, at threshold acetaldehyde. It comes off like kind of a corn chip Tostitos kind of character. And beyond that, it's atrocious, but that's where it's like, you're like, fuck, we could have done better. And when you avoid it, that's when that version of 3470 West Coast Pills, I think, can be extraordinary and offer this ability.
So good.
Yeah.
I implore you all to buy a copper kettle from the 1930s because that fixes all of it.
I hang a rod in my kettle. Does that help?
Probably does.
Phil, talk to us, about your approach to fermentation.
Can I interrupt and just ask
Yeah, go for it.
I just want to hear the copper kettle explanation.
I don't know it other than with 3470 specifically. I think there is something that has to do with yeast nutrition that can be added with exogenous enzymes that is not needed with a copper kettle. And I don't know what that is. I don't know the science behind it, but I think that there is something that happens there that allows for a healthier, whether or not it's some kind of heavy metal that exists there that allows for a healthier fermentation without the need for additional enzymes.
I'll boldly say it's copper sulfide and zinc, and I could be full of shit. So if you're listening to this and want in the comments say I'm full of shit, I've heard it a ton of times, but I believe that's the answer to what he just said.
So funny you say that. In my IPA producing realm here at Beerset, I've made 2 beers twice. One of which I've made for the second time, and it's currently in the tank. And I added a little bit of zinc during, at the start of fermentation, with dry yeast, Fermentis USO5 Chico, with the sole purpose of helping to encourage attenuation, yeast health in general, which is what we're talking about. And so far, it's had very positive results. And I'm not sure if that's the substrate with which those dry yeasts are grown or the way they're packaged or not, but the copper kettle itself has not seemed to make as much of a positive impact on the fermentation as adding zinc has.
real quick, since for the benefit of everybody listening, since we're talking about zinc, what are you guys using?
We're using a variety of products. We've trialed a few. Some carry products.
Through BSG, I think it's zinc sulfate. Maybe?
Yeah, there we go.
You're adding it. When are you adding it?
Whirlpool.
Okay.
Or into boil.
Gotcha.
Actually into boil at Lafayette, so it sends it and homogenizes it in the whirlpool. But yeah, I would even say my previous comment was mainly because I made beer with Phil for a while. It was always hard to outsmart him. So if I had a chance to have the answer, I had to take it.
Well, this
I don't even
Westbound
try.
IPA is really good, so you nailed that one.
But no, I do think any of these ways you get to, I think what I was getting at broadly is like, there aren't answers that are homogenous to everyone's brew house or everyone's situation. If we were all using RO water and all using the same brew house, then they would be more homogenous, but that isn't the situation. So whoever's listening, or even ourselves, we operate 3 different brew houses at Westbound and Down. All those things have to be taken into consideration, but I think the point being is the happiest.
And it's interesting that you say that because you all have water sources that are not dissimilar. Like it's lots of reservoir water. It's lots of, bottom of reservoir. It's not it's not aquifer. It's generally pretty neutral, pretty clean.
Yeah.
And so even within that kind of realm where a lot of the water is not that different than each other, you're still finding these kinds of differences.
Massive differences. And I would say that, within that, I think the ultimate outcome is how can you get to vigorous fermentations that get you to results very quickly, especially when making hoppy beer where trapping volatile compounds is ultimately the game, right? So if you have to take, it happens to the best of us, right? Like we fuck this up all the time. But like if we get 10 or 11 day passing forced diacetyl tests, those beers are awesome. Hard not to use expletives, how great they are. When they
Jake,
linger,
you're welcome to use all the expletives you want.
I didn't know
we
the
mark
rules.
this as explicit. It's
Okay,
all
cool.
adults listening.
Well, they're fucking great.
They're fucking
and then,
great, exactly.
And then when you move to 12 and 13 days,
Is this one of these beers? 'Cause
Yeah,
it's fucking great.
yeah, that's one of those beers. And but you want to repeat that. Yeast is something you have to manage, and you hope to manage it vigilantly and be right on top of it. But, all the multitude of things we've discussed, whether it's zinc, changing water,
Calcium in general.
calcium in general in the water, right? It's like how many times it's great to be proactive, and we're doing water tests quarterly. And then also every time something goes wrong, it's like, that was weird, boom, water test. And usually that's the answer. Like usually we're like, we're scoping the yeast. So it's we're not guessing on that front. So when things go wrong anywhere else, the first answer is, usually the yeast. We trust everyone on the brew deck. Like nothing likely went wrong there. And usually almost every time we have a change in water source or whatnot, especially in Lafayette. The water's great there, but that tends to be where our cause is. And then we identify that issue, we address it, and we're back to 10 or, passing forced diacetyl tests. And our process is, and it's very unsophisticated, is 2 days, same pH with 0.05, same gravity within less than a 0.1 change. So like if it flashes with the density meter 0.1, that's okay. But definitive 0.1 change doesn't count. You have to wait till the next day. And then that happens usually on day 8, 9, and then 2 days of a forced VDK test. 4 people smell it. We all agree it passed. If it does it one day, it's got to do the next, and we crash it. On a perfect world, that's day 9 and 10. That almost never happens, but day 10 and 11 is pretty usual. And whether it happens on 9 and 10 or 10 and 11 is what, like when that happens, we're like, at World Beer Cup or GABF time, we're like, let's go. If that doesn't happen, it doesn't mean it isn't great, but it does mean inevitably, like beer's warmer, tank capped or not, like we are losing volatile compounds. It isn't good. It doesn't
makes
mean
sense.
It doesn't mean you can't win. It just doesn't mean you're losing. You're not stacking the deck in your favor. So that's,
Do you change your dry hop if that happens?
no, I mean we're past that at that point. We're early dry hop guys. I think there's a lot of good technique. We're very lean into the hop creep kind of people. I know there's people that like pre-crash. We're harvest yeast dry hop people. We have some techniques where we harvest yeast, dry hop same day, tank open, dry hop 2 days later, or just harvest yeast, dry hop all of it, cap. Our dry hop loads are high enough that for the most part we don't do that, just for like safety reasons, and just it's hard to put 130 pounds of hops in a 30 barrel tank, or 110 pounds of hops in a tank the same day you harvest yeast is the only reason we wouldn't just be all of that technique. But we like that yeast interaction. We like how it reduces DO introduction. We like its ability to deal with some of the non oxygen hydrocarbon fraction of like more of the myrcene kind of hop quality products that are harsher, or I should say oil content, not hop products. But so we like that flavor, and I think that's part of the kind of cleaner, fruitier Westbound character. But I think also leads to longevity. That being said, I've drank some, he said it, Hutch has said it a bunch of times, it's more than one way to skin a cat. I've drank some beers with guys that cold crash to 60 and dry hop and make completely world-class IPA. It's a technique I haven't learned, and we've never used at Westbound.
Phil, we didn't really talk about your fermentation. How do you approach fermentation in yours?
For most of these beers, it's just Chico yeast for me. Admittedly, it's
Chico yeast here in Bierstadt Lagerhaus.
yeah
With decocted IPA. Okay.
and because of that, it's always dry yeast. I have one tank, so I have no opportunity to repitch yeast. So it's dry yeast with that first pitch of dry yeast, especially as we touched on before. I think zinc is really important to that, but I think just an overall yeast health and how you create that is really important. I'm a fan that in West Coast IPAs, I just want the hops to be the showcase. I can use malt to build some texture, but outside of that, I don't really want any ester compounds. I don't want any yeast influence at all. So it's generally knockout on the cooler end. That's like a 66 Fahrenheit degrees for me, and then ferment at 68 Fahrenheit, and let it go there. And then towards day 3 or 4, once it's hit its high Kreutzen, you can let it go a little bit and make sure it hits attenuation, similar to what Jake said, into getting the hops in, at least a first load in early, help that hop creep start to go when there still is yeast in solution, and just go from there. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I think that's about it. I think reducing that ester production is important for me, and that for me that generally just means a slightly cooler knockout and a slightly cooler fermentation, especially in the first 48 hours, and then letting it go from there.
Fermentus yeast, you can buy it from BSG and Country Malt. If you need to pay Phil Joyce, he can list your Venmo. It felt like a commercial after I said what I said.
We didn't talk a lot about temperatures, and I'm glad that you brought it up. I don't have anything game-changing there, but just for the record, we're typically knocking out around 64 to 65, setting it for 66 for the first 2 days, then stepping up to 68, and then we'll go as high as 70 or 72 after like day 4 or whatever.
We're basically the same. We're just at 66 for one day,
Sure.
and then to 68, and then up. But I think we're all
So that ester production is very front loaded in this fermentation, as long as you-
or non-existent, really.
or non-existent. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you keep it low early,
So you're knocking out at 66 and holding at 66?
Correct.
Cool. So Phil is, for the record, and again, you're the expert, but it seems like Phil is the lowest on
You're
the
calling
ester
me the expert?
Well,
What
I
are you
mean,
talking about,
You get
Jake?
the dictionary or whatever on your website,
I'm a proud attendee of the Ashley Carter camp for Make Lager Better, which is ferment colder, and I just do that, and it works well.
Yeah. But I mean, we're knocking out colder, but I'm just saying, but still that little 2-degree swing that you're avoiding would make you the lowest ester guy on the board.
Within 1 degree, and God knows with my equipment, like that could be completely inaccurate. I might be knocking out at 84. I have no idea, man. It's like a 20-year-old brew house, but
Well, I mean, that's fair enough. I mean, ours are plus or minus 1 degree settings. So, but I mean, I think is of note. I mean, Phil's talking about the lowest ester production. He's knocking out the same, he's controlling that window of growth, which
Sure.
is the highest ester, we all know that.
But he's also using Chico versus some of the other, kind of fermentation approaches. So he also has to do that, for that reason.
But we're all basically using Chico.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Anyway, should we talk about hops next? I mean, we're an hour and 20 something minutes into this podcast, and
That's how you always do it. I know the least about this topic, so I'll let them take it off.
so maybe we now start talking about hops. Obviously, maybe we start talking about bittering hops first, because as all of you have mentioned, the bitterness is a key feature of this beer. Obviously, especially in this lighter and lighter iteration, that bitterness needs to operate in scale with the overall weight of the beer. But also achieving a very clean bitterness, but also a characterful bitterness, and making sure that the flavors and the bitterness are operating in concert. I mean, that's the difference now between a pretty mediocre West Coast IPA and an award-winning IPA. And so, all of you all brewing award-winning IPAs understand the assignment, and that finding ways to tuck that bitterness into the overall flavor character in a way that feels accessible, but also firm and also structured, becomes a pretty important thing here. Hutch, why don't you talk about the way that you, as you're developing recipes, think about bitterness, think about hop character, also think about some of the individual characters of specific hops, and then think about how that works into your West Coast IPA process.
sure. The first thing that comes to mind is disclaimer, which is that I feel like I'm constantly evolving with this, and what I'm doing right now is not what I was doing a year ago.
Great, because the last time we talked was 2 years ago,
Right.
Which means whatever you're going to tell me is different than that.
It
which
is
means that when we
different.
talk 2 years from now, it's going to be different again.
Totally.
And I can't wait for that.
I think where my brain is at right now is that I like when bitterness and hop flavor are you're almost unable to differentiate between the two.
Yeah.
Because I think when you bitter a beer appropriately, it adds hop flavor, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Or your brain has a difficult time creating a discrepancy between that bitterness and that flavor. So that's kind of what I'm shooting for, is where you drink the beer, you get the initial bitterness, and that immediately just transcends into hop saturation and flavor.
We're going to pour some of your Project Alpha here in the background.
Cool. That's
while you keep talking to us
it's
about
highly
this.
experimental. So what I'm saying right now might be full of shit. We'll see if the beer actually. This is our first time. Wow, Phil, that's a terrible pour, buddy.
Hey, foam is good.
This is our first time using CO2 extract. I know that these guys have used it extensively, and I consulted them prior to using it. I think one of the reasons that I've been trepidatious about using it is because we're on a 7-barrel system, and those 150 GMA cans, like most people are doing it at 10 barrels or at 15 barrels, and there's not a real great way to, you're not using half of it accurately. You know what I mean?
Right.
We're at 300 GMA at 15 now, so.
Awesome. Yeah. Well,
So you're good.
hopefully this will this beer will speak to that as well. I think I'm okay with it, basically, is where I'm going with it. And part of the reason that I wanted to start using it is because I was drinking Phil's beer and Jake's beer, and I was getting that level of bitterness that transcends immediately into hop flavor. And I was missing that in my beer. You better save me at least one sip, Jamie, so I know I'm not full of
there's
shit.
just still at least a quarter of that crowler left for you.
But anyway, I think it's adding more than bitterness, I guess is my point. Or if it is just bitterness, it's this ethereal level of bitterness that transcends into hop flavor, right? So that's
He did it again.
That's magical to me. It's magical to me, and I haven't achieved that yet. And these guys have already done it.
Magical to me.
Yeah, smelling this beer
Again.
is magical to all of us.
Yeah.
Well, I'm
Jesus
inspired.
Christ, Hutch.
I'm inspired by the beer produced by the two other brewers at this table, and that's why I wanted to start using that. And Phil will tell you, I called him and I was like, dude, I need to figure this out. Like I want to start using this stuff because I think it matters. And so this is our first foray into it. And I guess that's my current
This is your
philosophy.
first beer using CO2 extract?
Correct. Yeah, we've never done it because I always felt like, and probably just me being uneducated, I always felt like it was our system was a little too small to use like an entire can or whatever. But this beer is not too bitter. I think we actually have room.
It could actually be even more bitter.
Right.
It's very
right.
aromatic.
Right.
And
I had to be careful because I didn't want to overdo it the first time. So I was being more cautious with first wort additions and even like later flavor additions with this beer. So I was playing it safe, basically, and trying to make sure I just didn't make an undrinkably bitter beer. But I think the thing we always figure out is that just doesn't really happen.
So if you're not from Colorado and listen to this, I can say, I've obviously already stated I am a Hutch and Cannonball Creek super fan, but for everybody that has made IPA in Colorado and gives a fuck, everyone knows like where they were when they drank a certain alpha project. Like I remember where I was when I drank 4 and 10 and 24 and 40. And now I can say that 74, I will remember I was here. Hutch can sit here and tell us that he is, learning at doing anything. And I'm not saying that is not authentic or true. It probably is. But if you were drinking what Phil and I are experiencing, I think Phil would second that it tastes like a masterful dunk on what West Coast IPA can be. And so to sit there and be like, we were experimenting with using CO2 extract. If you're drinking what I was drinking, you would be like, fuck this guy. This is an absolute masterpiece.
But the thing is, it
could almost be part of his, like an educational class of how to use CO2 extract.
Did I not call
and he's
you?
sitting here. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying
I called
didn't
you,
ask
Phil,
some questions.
and I was like, dude, I don't know what to do with this stuff. And Phil talked me through it. Right? That's accurate.
That's true.
Yeah.
What were the talking points?
I was concerned about bitterness, and then I was also very much interested in the timing of it and when you add it to the boil, and as far as what that accomplishes as far as flavor and aroma and hop saturation are concerned.
Where were they used here?
This beer, we added it at 10 minutes before the end of the boil.
Okay. Yeah, that's we're huge users of CO2 extract.
Right. And I think your beers stand out because of it.
Talk to me. What is it about CO2 extract, especially using it hot side versus pellets, or using it versus concentrated pellets like cryo?
Well, so I think for its mint use, which is, bittering.
I'm going to interrupt. This beer is really fucking good.
Yeah. It's stunning. It's
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Damn it, Hutch. Come on.
Yeah. Who expected the most award-winning brewer in the history of Colorado to bring the best beer to the table? Son of a bitch. No, I mean, I think at Westbound, we've been, I think everyone at this table, if I were to, sorry, I keep getting away from the mic and getting yelled at for it. I think I speak loudly, but I guess I do not. I think if everyone at this table would agree with the fact that we're after huge hop aroma with bitterness that is firm. The discrepancy between the three of us of how firm that is, I think, would define our beers. But I think everyone would agree a key component to West Coast IPA at its finest, which is expressed almost the best by Phil, who is literally in a lager brewery. Because I think what we're all talking about is how close can you make IPA to lager? Like, that is what West Coast IPA is, right?
And
like,
to simplify that, what you mean is drinkability, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like
Can you make West Coast IPA as drinkable as great lager?
Yeah, and just hop the fuck out of it after that. Like, that is the conversation. Like, that is what I think about every day. That is the chase, right? Like, how close to Pilsner can you get while hopping the fuck out of it and making it wildly aromatic? That is the goal.
My beer's gone.
So the point being, CO2 extract, I think, for Westbound plays a major role because of its ability to create bitterness that is on and off your palate. We talk about snappiness. We're obsessed with pH, much in the way that Pilsner brewers are. And it's a harder conversation because in Pilsner brewing, you're looking for those low 4 pH post-fermentation gravities, or post-fermentation pHs. But knowing that like a 0.0, I mean, again, not a linear scale, but 0.04 to 0.08 is what you're going to see in per pound per barrel raise in pH approximately. So you make a beer that finishes at 4.15 post fermentation pH. Dry hop it at 4 pounds per barrel. You're lucky if that's under 4.5. So that's why at Westbound we chase pH intensely. Also because we're obsessed with fruit forward hop presentations. And what is fruit? It has acidity. So like fruit is not going to taste fruity at 4.6. It's going to taste fruitier at 4.4 and cleaner and more expressive. So, and also, again, as I've said on other conversations with craft beer and brewing, have more longevity. So that's been pretty well studied by people way smarter than me, mostly, again, to reference Ben and Breakside. But I think CO2 extract aids in all of that, right? It lowers hop material in the front load. So we've got a pH control aspect. B, it aids like a type of hop bitterness that is just on and off your palate that reminds you of, in a way, similar to a low alpha hop kind of bitterness.
Sure. Yeah, and I think you made several good points there. I think one of the things that we were trying to achieve was less perceptible vegetative matter in the beer, right? Because then we start getting into polyphenols and all that stuff too that start influencing flavor considerably, right? And I think that's what honestly, I was enjoying it in your beer and getting mad that it wasn't in my beer. And that's why we started using it, or we decided to play with it. So.
Well, and that's something at Westbound we consider all the time in this, like, both constant chase of longevity, but also drinkability. And I think both those things come hand in hand. I mean, lager has a long history of both being incredibly drinkable and also one of the most shelf-stable beers on the market. So I think we're iterating on the same idea where CO2 extract... Specifically, I would say spend your money and just get Simcoe CO2 extract. Low cohumulone matters. It plays out with pellets. It will play out with CO2 extract.
This is actually bullion CO2 extract, just so you know.
Is it?
Yeah. No. There's no bullion hops.
I was like, you always make the bullion jokes, but I never know.
Because they're funny. I'm just that old.
Yeah. I know. I was now you've made my next joke already. I was going to be like, I didn't even know they made bullion anymore. But no, I think, all the shit matters. And, but it all gets back to how drinkable you can make IPA. And I think that's at the core of what West Coast IPA as a style is how consumable how consumable can you make massively aromatic beer? That is the goal. Like that would be the description. It should be the description for the style guidelines to win it at JBF or World Beer Cup. What is the most massively hoppy beer aromatically that is the most drinkable? That is what should win.
And never mind that it's in the realm of 7% ABV too, which is interesting and crazy. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Like meet the style guidelines and then produce the most drinkable, highly aromatic beer. That's it. And that's what I do. And that's what I know. I mean, without even asking the question, I know it's what the two guys I'm sitting at the table do. And our best friends in California that I think are the best producers, and Oregon the same, with one guy that sneaks into Washington that I would also think of, barely.
Camas is basically Oregon.
Yeah. And,
Oregon
that's
adjacent, yeah.
Oregon adjacent, but that's what they're
It's
all
like 10
after.
minutes from the Portland airport. It's
That's where I go first when I land.
Me too.
They're talking about Grains of Wrath and Mike Hunsaker, and yeah.
Total
For those
asshole.
for those that don't get the jokes here.
Fuck you, Angry Mike. But no, it's. But I think we're all chasing the same thing, which is like how all the descriptions here: Pilsner malt combos, yeast approaches. It's all really about like how drinkable can you make IPA and a massive hop load. And I think 3470 can become a great tool in that. But regardless, I think the goal is the same.
Yeah. We're getting on in time here, and we do need to wrap it up sometime soon. But we should talk about creatively how you think about hop flavor and not just hop bitterness. Sure. And thinking about how you construct compelling things that work within this West Coast IPA palette that we've now constructed. How do you think about building actual flavor and aroma through hop selection, hop choices in West Coast IPA? Phil, you've been a little quiet here.
Yeah, I'm going to take a.
And we can talk about New Zealand also in this kind of scope.
I'm going to take a quick backtrack, which is to say that I think that hop flavor and aroma is accentuated by palatability. So it all comes back to the whole same thing of drinkability. And I think what's fun about these beers that have CO2 extract is I think about bitterness in 3 buckets. So I think about an isomerized alpha acid. So you look at something like a Pilsner beer, and it's all boiled hops. And there is a crispness and a snappiness and a drinkability quotient to that is very, very high. And then you have a second bucket, which is humulinones, which is more of they're water soluble, so you can get them via dry hop. And then the third bucket is a polyphenol, which is like at the extreme end of like a hazy IPA, you get a hop burn that exists there too. And there is some marriage of the 3 of those things that I think lends itself to a palatability that lets a flavor and aroma hang on your palate and makes it very enjoyable. And I'm in a big camp of like boiled hops. Like I want them there. I want a high isoalpha, isomerized alpha acid content, because similar to a Pilsner beer or something like that, I think it lends itself to a high level of drinkability, similar to these CO2 extracts. Once you get into the humulinones, you actually, the science would say, and again, I've made 10 IPAs on this system here at BeerStat, so my sample size is low. But I think once you start,
This guy barely knows what he's talking about.
Once you start adding dry hops, you have these other bitterness components that actually detract from a boiled hop character, and it perceives on the palate in a different way. And I think that there is some, again, marriage of the 2 that is really important in West Coast IPA, but I lean heavy on a boiled hop character. And I think that makes it snappy, drinkable. It's on your palate. It's off. It makes you want to drink more. I mean, I drank Hutch's beer here about as fast as anything I've drank today.
You finished your re-pour faster than I've
It's a
my first pour.
really good beer. And I think this is a really good example of a beer that is high in isomerized alpha acid bitterness. So the bitterness is upfront on the palate. It doesn't really linger in the same way that the Hulenone or the polyphenol buckets, as I would call them, do. And I like that a lot in terms of drinkability. I forgot your question already. I missed that portion of the conversation.
Let's
and I really
move on. Hutch, how do you...
I would quickly interject that was one of the most intelligent descriptions of bitterness I've heard in quite some time.
Agreed.
Which
Actually,
is why
everything
I
Phil was
jokingly
saying,
interjected that he didn't know what he was talking
he
about.
might have
It's like,
forgot the question, but he answered the question really, really well. I think.
Might have answered questions that we weren't asking.
I think the analogy that you made, Phil, between Pilsner and IPA and boiled hops and drinkability is all very, very, very valid, right? And we're talking about these isomerized alpha acids, and I think that's what we were kind of enjoying in this beer in particular. I think Jamie's original question was more about hop flavor or whatever,
Flavor and aroma.
But I'm going to stand on like my current soapbox as of today is that they're almost inseparable, man. Like bitterness and flavor are almost the same thing, and you can't. It's not like it's a first word hop, a 30-minute hop, and a whirlpool hop, and you can differentiate like these flavors specifically. I think that's a really kind of narrow view of the way beer tastes. And
sure. So then, in that sense, when you're rubbing hops, are there some elements to that?
Yeah.
What are those things that as you are trying to visualize how this is going to translate from this raw material going through your process, whether that is cooking that and boiling that, or whether that is dry hopping that? What are some of those kind of key things that you look for? Those key characteristics that you are trying to select for or select against, in order to make sure that the hops that you end up with are going to produce the kind of character in the kind of combinations that you're looking for, that are going to be this fantastic or delicious.
I think in general, this is going to sound really, really simplistic compared to everything that Phil just told us, which was brilliant. I kind of hate to say it, but I think the Westbound and Cannonball team that is selecting hops right now, we're looking for pretty loud hops, man. We're looking for hops that stand out, that punch hard. And I think one thing that I've learned selecting is that you don't get awesome fruit flavor without some of those danky flavors that punch it forward. You know what I mean? So you can pick the hops that are just fruit and that are clean. And then there's the whole thing about how you use them, but that's a whole other thing, right? But I think in general, we want these hops that really punch forward pretty hard. As a caveat, the beer that we were all like drinking and talking about, that was the Super Delic that we all selected at CBC. That's a big component of that beer. You know what I mean? And that's a powerful, like, dank ass hop. You know what I mean? And then now we're starting to use it, like we're talking about blending and things like that, right? Which is extremely important. So I don't think there's a single IPA that I'm interested in making that doesn't have some component of punchy and dank. And then it's about balancing that out, right? Like Jake was talking about Citra and how approachable that hop is, and it certainly is, I mean, you can still just make a Citra Mosaic beer. It's incredible, right? As long as they're like average versions of that hop. But when we're selecting, we're thinking about what do we want our punchiest hops to be and how are we using them, right? Like we know that we're using a lot of Simcoe in the boil. I think both of us are doing that hot side. You're probably still doing that hop side. I don't know. But we're always going big on Simcoe in the kettle because it's a just nice, low cohumulin, clean, beautiful flavor hop. And then we're picking those hops that are just on the edge of like too dank and mixing them in with maybe a little bit more like softer, like rounder hops, like a Citra or something like that.
I think that also speaks to where you add the hops, cold side. So, if you're going to be the cold, dry hop guy, which is before my, era. Like I said, Hutch wasn't doing that, and I was just kind of copycatting what he was doing. It was the beginning of my career. But that would lead towards picking less dank cold hops, right? So you don't have any of this biomechanical kind of activity, this like whether it's thiolized, but interaction between yeast and hops, right? If you're dropping hops or if you're dropping yeast out, that's not going to be part of it. So pushing towards like I would describe Westbound selection technique as pick the cleanest hops on the table that are the loudest, and then pick the hops beyond that have a dank punch that push it beyond clean. Like that's the best hop on the table, is the one that you're like, all right, that one's the cleanest and this one's the loudest. And there might be another one that's just crazy loud, but it's just weird and bizarre. That's not our hop at Westbound.
Well, don't we prioritize deselecting, and Jamie brought that term up, right? And I think that is the first step to selecting hops, is to get rid of anything that you don't want to be there, right? And then you pick the loudest guy in the room after that, right?
Totally. And I think we're just using different words to describe the same thing, which is, after you deselect, you know what you're selecting for, then add a dank component, knowing that those are sulfur compounds or compounds that have abilities to actually push fruit flavor further in the way we're choosing to dry hop beer, which is in active or tertiary fermentation. If you're a cold fermentation guy, the way we select hops would be fucking stupid. You should select way cleaner hops or danker hops because you want danker beers, but we're pushing dank character to attempt to use what we're identifying in the term dank, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to define dank. I'm using air quotes. I realized immediately I'm on a recording where air quotes don't work. So I was air quoting.
We see your air quotes, Jake.
Yeah. I'm glad I feel seen. But in dank air quote being seen, what I mean is that these are hops that have characteristics that are potential to turn into further hop character. So a lot of times we will be bordering on mesmerized by specifically Mosaic, where it can become armpit funk, super, like the dankest weed you smoked in college. And then it, Derek, who, if you don't know him, is probably the jolliest brewer in all of Colorado, and is one of the best reasons Westbound beer is great. But he'll describe the Mosaic we select as the best blueberries in someone's armpit that just ran a marathon. But that is not the result of the finished beer. It is just blueberry madness. And the reason is a lot of those sulfur compounds that are perceived as that dank and funky actually then turn into the ability to be thiolized compounds in any of these yeasts in active fermentation that push more fruit flavor forward. So I think we look for that edge, and then how can we push it?
Know that it's going to be rounded eventually too at some point. And I think that you're just saying it in a smarter way. Like when we were drinking that single hop Mosaic, you're like, oh, I'm surprised it's not so dank. And I'm like, well, it was for the first week. And now it's rounder and fruitier and softer and more full and flavorful with like all those flavors that people think they want. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And total side note to the conversation. If you get to end up selecting hops with a guy that inspired you to make beer, do that because it's pretty fucking cool. I've done that. Not saying you can rig that up, but it's ended up being a pretty cool part of my craft beer experience.
I'm the lucky one because I get to select hops. So,
well, this is a little love fest right here. I know we could keep this going on forever, but we've been talking for a while, and we need to wrap this up and get on to true beer drinking, on this Friday afternoon. And so maybe we'll just have some closing thoughts. Phil, do you have any, thoughts about the conversation today and some takeaways, for folks out there from your process and things that other brewers should be thinking about right now?
Yeah, I think sort of to bring it closed loop, we started talking about how you design a malt beer or a fermentation based on freshness. And then we kind of dabbled in bitterness and a few other things and hops. And ultimately, whether or not it's fresh in a package or it's fresh on your palate, which I think is often forgotten, the beers that I enjoy most are fresh on the palate. I want to drink them and drink them again, and I find myself drinking them very quickly, and I am a consumer, but when we talk about freshness of hop flavor and aroma and how critical that is to that style, I think that's really important in a package, but it's also that much more accentuated by the fact that I'm constantly drinking a beer to keep it fresh on my palate. So even if aroma and flavor is lackluster, but I'm drinking it really quickly, I'm refreshing my palate constantly with those flavors. And I think this beer that we just drank from Hutch is a great example of that. I mean, I drank it faster than anything else today. And so that flavor and aroma was constantly reminded on my palate, and I enjoyed it for that reason. And that is another sort of contributor to the freshness conversation and how that plays out.
Sure. Hutch, what are some of your big takeaways?
I just keep thinking about what Jake was saying earlier, and I think it's very analogous to what Phil's saying right now, which is all we're really trying to do is make this beer as alive and exciting and a presentation of the hops that we're using as we possibly can, right? And so it's about all the tricks, whether that's inside your brew house, whether that's about water, whether that's about malt. It's all about simply letting those hops shine through and being, having the quiver to make that happen, right? By not making inappropriate malt choices, by making sure that your fermentation is clean. That's really all we're going for, right? And I guess for me, my final comment is just that, like, I really do feel like I'm always learning and constantly learning, and like I do have a lot to learn. Phil and I were talking about this individually before this podcast, and I was like, dude, I kind of hit a wall, and I was like, man, I got to get better. I got to up my game. You know what I mean? And I know that's whatever. I see the face.
What the fuck are you talking about?
What I'm talking about.
That is insane to me, Hutch.
I didn't know that was appropriate for me to say, but that was what I was thinking.
I'm being completely honest, and I'm saying that I'm drinking other people's beer, and it's inspiring to me. And there's things I like about it more than I like my own beer, and it fucking pisses me off, and I want to get better. You know what I mean? And so I think that kind of hunger and that, like, staying relevant and not just like, oh, this is how you make West Coast IPA, use Pilsner malt and blah, 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 blah. No, like get out there and enjoy the beers that these incredibly creative, brilliant people
There's
are
the
making.
psychological compulsion to hate what you do, to love what other people do.
I don't hate it. I love it to death.
Okay, good.
But
Good. You should.
But I am constantly impressed by what other people are doing, and it's always inspiring. So that's that.
That's beautiful. And I mean, if you can't be happy with what you're doing, then there's no hope for the rest of us. Like, we should all just stop now. Anyway, Jake, bring this one home for us.
Well, yeah, we have a saying at Westbound and Down that I like hiring brewers that hate losing more than they like winning. And I can say for sure, I'm at a table, Phil worked for me, and embodied that about as much as anybody. Alex Bach and Mike Tyam with that same mentality of just, it isn't about winning, it's about not losing. And I fell in love with craft beer, as I mentioned in the beginning, drinking Hutch's beer and talking with him over a decade now. I know that the same is true. He literally just basically stated it out loud that the people that are the best at this, maybe the best at anything, it might be a bigger exemplar, is that it isn't about winning. It's about hating losing. And that is a driver in people that I think is incredible. And I think in hoppy beer, specifically in a style unlike Pilsner, where there is a goal, right? There is an end fashion to that. We've defined what greatness is, and everyone's just chasing a wall. Whereas in West Coast IPA, we're still defining what the end wall is. So for that, I think the people that hate losing more than they like winning are the people that are really good at it. So I'm really happy that these guys are my buddies, and I get to hang out and drink beer with them. And I'm really happy that I got a couple of those buddies on my own team.
That is a great place to bring this to a close. G&D Chillers offers free piping design and consultation with the sale of every chiller they build. Unlock the ultra-low diacetyl cheat code with fresh strains from Berkeley Yeast. Let Old Orchard assist with your R&D through their custom blend development program. Indie Hop Strata is available in every format you need, from Hyperboost to CGX pellets and classic T90s. SS Brewtech's Unitank 2.0 will help you get the most from your homebrew and pilot batch fermentations. Isuzu trucks are the trucks you trust for the work you do. Sativa offers a comprehensive portfolio of laboratory filtration products designed for both lab and production floor use. And get tickets now for your 2025 Craft Beer and Brewing Brewers Retreat at brewersretreat.com. If you enjoyed this episode and any other, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, support, and show that these conversations matter to you. Jake, if people want to learn more about Westbound, where do they find you?
All over the state of Colorado.
Fair enough. Hutch, if people want to learn more about Cannonball Creek, where do they find you guys?
CannonballCreekBrewing.com works.
Phil, if people want to learn more about Amalgam and the IPAs that you brew, where do they find you?
Yeah, local beer stores, local beer bars. That's about it.
All right. Well, it's been wonderful to talk to you guys about brewing award-winning West Coast IPA. I have no idea how Chris Black was able to put that scissor lift in reverse just as many times as he was able to, just to fuck with us through the course of this podcast. But kudos to Chris. I mean, this is not a big space out there, and somehow he figured out how to keep making that thing beep.
I feel like he's playing basketball or something, like just doing layups.
And also, we do have a website. I didn't understand the question. Westboundeddown.com. I thought you were asking where you could drink our beer. I was like, it's around. All right.
Get you, Jake. All right. It was great talking with you guys about brewing West Coast IPA. Keep doing what you do. It's I love my access to it, and I can't wait to drink even more. Cheers.
Thanks for having us,
Cheers.
man.
Yeah, thank
This
you.
is a blast.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.